My name is Lisa, and at 34 years old, I had been with Nathan for 3 years. I was a photographer, quietly building a portfolio of landscapes and portrait work, thriving in the solitude of my craft. Nathan, on the other hand, was magnetic, everything I wasn't, bold, charismatic, and adored by thousands online. Our worlds collided at a photography exhibition in Los Angeles. He had wandered in with that easy smile that could disarm anyone, chatting with a friend while his eyes flicked toward the gallery windows, soaking in the sunset. I nearly dropped my camera trying to capture that perfect light outside, and he laughed at my flustered expression. That laugh, it was warm, unself-conscious, and it lingered in my memory long after the night ended. We talked for hours, walking under the city lights, sharing stories that felt like we'd known each other for years. He was fascinated by the way I framed light and shadow, and I was captivated by his fearless embrace of life. That night, I felt a spark, one of those rare connections that feels inevitable, as if your soul recognizes another. It was intoxicating, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to dream of a future I hadn't dared imagine. The first 18 months were intoxicating. We traveled together, blending work and pleasure seamlessly. I photographed Nathan in exotic locations: Bali rice fields, Icelandic glaciers, sunlit cliffs of Santorini, while he shared his adventures online, building a brand that felt bigger than life. When he smiled for the camera, it was for me too, I told myself. Yet subtle cracks were already forming. Nathan had this way of diverting attention without realizing, or perhaps without caring, that I existed in the background. During shoots, his gaze would linger on the crew, the PR assistants, the other influencers. When I suggested we skip a stage photo to enjoy the moment, he would brush it off with a casual, "Don't be dramatic, Lisa." I laughed it off, swallowed the frustration, convinced myself I was being sensitive. Over time, those little moments accumulated like fine cracks in a wall I didn't want to see. I had met his family once, during a brief trip to Sacramento. They were polite, warm, yet there was an undercurrent of scrutiny, the way parents measure the people their children bring into their lives. I could feel them judging me. Was I enough? Could I fit into Nathan's orbit without breaking? I smiled, nodded, tried harder, not realizing that those early interactions foreshadowed the pressure I would later face as his partner, caught between his family, his brand, and my own boundaries. By the second year, Nathan became more consumed by his online persona. I was quietly building my photography career, but I found myself fading into the background of his world. Every reshoot, every perfectly timed post, every staged laugh. It wasn't about us anymore. It was about the audience he craved. And yet, when I voiced concerns, I was labeled dramatic or insecure. I wanted to believe in us, wanted to believe he loved me as I loved him, so I swallowed my doubts. Then there was Chloe, the PR assistant he'd recently hired. Young, charming, always hovering with a helpful smile. I didn't realize at first how her presence would magnify Nathan's shifting attention, how the casual familiarity between them would quietly erode my confidence. And Aaron, my old friend, who had always supported me quietly from the sidelines, would later become a sounding board when the cracks became chasms. I loved Nathan fiercely, like watching the sunrise, knowing it existed even when you couldn't reach it. But I would come to learn that for him, the sunrise was always for the world to see, not for me. And yet, I held on, blind to the patterns forming, blind to the subtle signs of neglect that would culminate in the Maui trip. I didn't know then how much the line between love and performance could blur, or how painful it could be when someone you trust turns your love into content for others. It didn't happen all at once. The tension started as whispers, small cracks in our seemingly perfect life that I chose to ignore. Nathan had always been charismatic, but over time, his charm began to feel performative, like it was reserved for the camera or the audience watching us online. I started noticing how he smiled differently around Chloe, the PR assistant hired to manage his sponsored trips. She was professional, sure, but the way she laughed at his jokes, so much longer than anyone else, and leaned in slightly closer during conversations, it prickled something deep inside me. It wasn't jealousy at first. I trusted Nathan, or maybe I trusted the version of him I wanted to see. But then there were the little things that made my stomach tighten. During editing sessions, he'd brush off my opinions, nod politely, then go back to talking to Chloe about lighting, angles, and captions. In the beginning, I told myself I was overreacting, that I needed to support him. But my heart knew otherwise. Nathan's family did not help. His younger sister had a sly way of making comments, innocuous at first, about my dedication. "Lisa, you really just follow him everywhere, don't you?" she'd ask with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Nathan would laugh awkwardly, but never correct her. His mother, though warm, asked questions with a subtle edge. "Are you sure you can handle his world? It's demanding. He's not easy to keep up with." Each remark felt like a warning I wasn't ready to hear, a seed planted that maybe I wasn't enough. Chloe, the PR assistant, seemed harmless, but her presence grew heavier with each trip. She was always around, always helpful, always laughing at his jokes in ways that made me shrink into myself. Nathan didn't notice, or pretended not to, how small I felt beside her. Once, during a casual conversation about sunrise shoots, Chloe joked, "You two make quite the team, huh?" And Nathan laughed, and I felt my chest tighten. There was nothing overt, nothing physical, but the energy between them was electric, and it was mine to feel powerless against. Aaron, my closest friend, noticed too. One night, as I vented over a quiet dinner, he leaned across the table and said, "Lisa, I don't want to scare you, but you're not imagining it. There's something shifting with Nathan. You need to pay attention to how you feel, not just what he says." I nodded, trying to dismiss the warning, telling myself I was being sensitive. But deep down, I knew Aaron was right. The air between Nathan and me started to feel heavier, charged. He would dismiss my suggestions, laugh at my worries, and then post selfies online with Chloe nearby. Comments like, "Chloe looks like a good partner in this shoot," or "Teamwork makes the dream work," appeared everywhere, and my heart sank with each one. I wanted to confront him, to demand reassurance, but a part of me feared confirming something I wasn't ready to see. It wasn't a single event that signaled the collapse. It was a series of small betrayals, moments of dismissal, laughter that didn't include me, glances that lingered too long. My unease grew like a storm cloud I couldn't disperse, a quiet anxiety that followed me everywhere, making me question my worth, my place, and the foundation of the love I thought we shared. By the time the Maui trip was announced, a luxury-sponsored press trip with multiple influencers and partners, I was already on edge. Something inside me whispered that this trip would expose everything I had been trying to ignore, and it did. The Maui trip was supposed to be a reset, a chance to rekindle the connection Nathan and I had in those early, intoxicating months. The itinerary promised sunrises, private beaches, and endless photo ops, a luxury influencer campaign sponsored by a major travel brand. 6 influencers were invited, along with their partners. On the surface, it was glamorous, a dream job for Nathan, and an opportunity for me to support him while capturing moments that were genuinely ours, or so I told myself. Day 1 went as expected. Nathan was in his element, charming, charismatic, always aware of the camera. Chloe introduced herself as the PR coordinator, warm and professional, nothing to alarm me yet. But by day 2, the subtle undercurrent of tension I had been ignoring came crashing to the surface. We arrived at a secluded beach before sunrise. The golden light spilled over the horizon, casting long shadows and illuminating the turquoise waves. Nathan immediately began setting up, giving Chloe instructions while I sat under a palm tree, laptop on my knees, editing footage from the previous morning. I should have been absorbed in the scenery, in the quiet, but my eyes kept flicking to him, to the way he and Chloe interacted. Chloe leaned close to Nathan, holding a bottle of sunscreen, laughing at something he had said. Nathan's posture was casual, relaxed, but there was a subtle intimacy in the way they leaned toward each other, a comfort I no longer felt. My chest tightened, a cold knot forming in my stomach. I told myself it was nothing, that I was reading too much into it, but deep down, I knew better. Then it happened. Chloe held up the sunscreen and called out teasingly, "Nathan, can you help me with this? Lisa gets so weird about sunscreen stuff." The group chuckled. I froze, staring at my laptop, trying to convince myself to ignore it. But the moment was searing, her voice carrying across the sand, Nathan's laughter mingling with hers, the attention on Chloe's side instead of me. And then Nathan turned toward me, smiling in a way that felt casual but carried a subtle edge. "If you're jealous, just go home," Chloe added, louder this time, with a smirk that was almost testing me. The silence that followed was deafening. Every pair of eyes on the beach seemed to land on me, waiting to see my reaction. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I felt exposed, small, humiliated. I didn't speak. I didn't even move for a moment, caught between disbelief and fury. I closed my laptop, stood up, grabbed my towel, and walked past them without a word. Chloe called after me, "Oh my God, I'm kidding." But the tone was sharp, defensive, the kind someone uses when they know they've crossed a line but refuse to admit it. Nathan didn't move, didn't call me back, didn't ask if I was okay. The rest of the group lingered awkwardly, some whispering, others pretending nothing happened. I felt every gaze pierce me like tiny knives. Back at the hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed, silent, staring at the wall, replaying the moment over and over. My phone buzzed. Messages from Nathan in the group chat, likely excuses for my absence. I ignored them. My body ached with the betrayal, the weight of being made invisible, of being the punchline. That evening, Nathan confronted me, but not in the way I expected. He rolled his eyes, impatient, irritated that I had missed the afternoon activities and embarrassed him in front of the others. "You're being childish, Lisa. Seriously. Everyone was asking where you went, and I had to make excuses for you," he said. No apology, no acknowledgement of Chloe's words, no concern for how small and dismissed I felt. While he showered, I quietly searched flights. There was a red-eye back to San Diego at 5 a.m. My hands shook as I hovered over the purchase button. Part of me thought I was overreacting, that relationships required patience, compromise. But another part, the part that had been shrinking inside me for 18 months, screamed that this was a pattern, not a patch, and I could no longer ignore it. By 4 a.m., I had packed my bag, written a note on the resort stationery. "You wanted me to go home. I am just listening." I left it on the nightstand and took an Uber to the airport. Every step felt surreal, like I was leaving not just Maui, but an entire life I had invested in, a version of myself I had been losing gradually. That day marked the turning point. The line between love and performance had finally revealed itself, and I realized sometimes walking away isn't surrender, it's reclaiming your own worth. Back in San Diego, the city felt foreign, even though it was home. I unpacked my bag slowly, almost mechanically, as if moving my belongings could ground me in reality. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sirens from the street below, and the echo of my own heartbeat, still pounding from the beach incident. My phone had 63 missed calls and a flurry of messages from Nathan, desperate, panicked, angry. But I didn't answer, not yet. I sank onto the couch, letting the weight of the last 2 days settle over me. For years, I had tried to blend into Nathan's life, to support him, to be quiet, useful, invisible. Now I realized that in doing so, I had been erasing myself. I had allowed someone else's validation, their audience, their world, to dictate my worth. And when that world mocked me, dismissed me, humiliated me publicly, I had nothing left, no defense, no acknowledgement, only the clarity that I needed to reclaim myself. Memories of the Maui trip played over and over in my mind. Chloe leaning in, Nathan's laughter, the way the group's eyes had all turned toward me as if I were the problem. I remembered my own silence, the careful choice to leave without a scene, without tears, without drama. I felt anger, yes, but also a strange relief. I had acted for myself, not for him, not for the world. For the first time in months, I had prioritized my own boundaries. Aaron called that night. His voice was calm, measured, grounding. "Lisa, how are you holding up?" he asked. I exhaled deeply. Honestly, conflicted, angry, sad, relieved, all at once. He paused. "I've been worried about you. You've been shrinking yourself for too long. You did the right thing." His words hit me with a weight I hadn't expected. Validation, not from social media, not from Nathan, but from someone who had seen me for years. I spent the evening reflecting on the warning signs I had ignored. Nathan's gradual dismissal of my input, the way he prioritized Chloe and the audience over me, the subtle, consistent undermining of my presence. I had laughed it off, rationalized it, tried to fit into his world, believing that love required sacrifice. But now, faced with the stark reality, I understood that what I had sacrificed wasn't convenience or comfort, it was myself. 2 days later, I finally confronted Nathan over the phone. My voice was steady, measured. "Nathan, we need to talk." There was a pause. His tone was defensive. "Lisa, I've been trying to reach you. What's going on?" I let him speak for a moment, listening without interrupting, and then I laid it out. "I walked away because you made me feel invisible, dismissed, and humiliated in front of people you work with and people who follow you online. Chloe wasn't just a coworker, she was part of the problem. And when I confronted you, or rather, when I reacted, you didn't see me. You saw inconvenience. You didn't apologize. You didn't even ask if I was okay. You only focused on how my reaction affected you." He hesitated, clearly caught off guard. "Lisa, it wasn't like that." "It felt like that," I replied, voice steady but firm. "For months, I've been trying to exist in your world, to support you, to be patient. I've watched you perform for the world while I became background noise. That's not love. That's not partnership. I had to leave because I was losing myself." There was a long silence. I could almost hear him processing, or failing to process, the truth in my words. "I didn't realize," he started, but I cut him off. "You didn't, and that's the problem. Recognition doesn't come after the fact. Actions matter, words matter, and you made me feel like my feelings were expendable." By the end of the call, Nathan was quiet. Not angry, not apologetic in a meaningful way, just subdued. I didn't try to persuade him. I didn't plead. I simply spoke my truth and reclaimed my voice. Hanging up, I felt a strange sense of empowerment, a mix of sadness and clarity. I had drawn a line, and for the first time, I had respected it. That night, I sat in my apartment and wrote, not for anyone else, not for social media, but for myself. I chronicled the Maui incident, my emotions, my thoughts about Nathan and Chloe, my fears and my revelations. I realized something important. Leaving had not been an act of cowardice. It was an act of self-preservation, of reclaiming my identity. I could no longer define my worth through someone else's lens. I could no longer perform for someone else's validation. For the first time, I allowed myself to breathe. The days after Maui were a strange blur. I returned to my photography work, editing photos, meeting clients, trying to ground myself in something tangible. But Nathan wasn't done. Messages, calls, and even a few unexpected visits began to arrive, all aimed at pulling me back into a world that had treated me like an afterthought. First came his friends, people who had once called me part of the team, who had shared laughs and casual dinners, suddenly turned their curiosity into subtle interrogations. "Why did you leave in Maui? Was it really worth it? Nathan seemed so worried. Didn't you care about him?" I felt each question like a jab, a reminder that in their eyes, I was now the one causing disruption. They didn't know the inside story, and they didn't want to. They wanted me to play a role, the unreasonable, emotional girlfriend who overreacted. Then Nathan's family joined in. I had always felt a quiet pressure from them, subtle comments about how I fit, or didn't fit, into their lives. Now, with the Maui incident amplified, the scrutiny intensified. His younger brother messaged me, "You humiliated Nathan in front of everyone. That's not how a partner acts." I stared at the screen, disbelief and anger warring in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to respond, to defend myself, but I knew that replying would only feed into the drama. I let the messages sit, unanswered. Meanwhile, Chloe's role became more pronounced. She wasn't just a PR coordinator. She had friends in Nathan's network, people who subtly reinforced the narrative that I was the problem. Screenshots from Maui, moments where she had teased me about sunscreen, where Nathan had laughed, were floating online, shared privately, framed as evidence of my insecurity. I felt a flash of disbelief. Even small private moments were now twisted into judgments. I began noticing patterns I had once dismissed. Nathan's subtle dismissals, Chloe's closeness, the way the group had reacted at the beach. All of it was a carefully orchestrated performance. I realized that I had been treated like an accessory for a long time, a background presence in Nathan's curated life. And yet the clarity this brought was painful. I had Confront not just his behavior, but the way I had allowed myself to shrink, to prioritize his validation over my own. One evening, Aaron came over. His presence was grounding, a reminder of life outside Nathan's carefully curated world. "Lisa," he said gently, "this isn't just about Maui. This is about a pattern. You've been silenced and minimized for too long, and the more you resist, the more they try to pull you back in." I nodded, tears brimming. "I know, but it's exhausting. I feel like I'm being punished for leaving." "That's exactly it," Aaron said. "You're being punished for having boundaries. But you're stronger than this. You don't have to justify yourself. The truth is yours." The next confrontation came unexpectedly. Nathan tried to corner me in a group chat, sending long messages, attempting to guilt me for the fallout. He framed it as concern for his public image, for Chloe, for everyone affected by my departure. I read the messages slowly, feeling my blood pressure spike, then realized something crucial. I no longer needed to defend myself. I no longer needed to negotiate my worth or explain my feelings. My reaction would be quiet, deliberate, and measured. I replied once. "I left because my boundaries were disrespected. That is my truth. I am done justifying myself." The impact was immediate. Nathan's friends whispered. His family murmured. Chloe's circle buzzed. They tried to reclaim the narrative, to paint me as unreasonable. But I noticed something remarkable. The harder they pushed, the more their actions exposed Nathan and Chloe's pattern of behavior. Screenshots, private messages, subtle slips, all revealed the underlying dynamics I had recognized in Maui but hadn't fully articulated. I began documenting everything: my own journal, private screenshots, timelines of conversations and incidents. Each entry reinforced what I already knew. I had acted correctly. I had stood up for myself without screaming, without begging, without performing. And in doing so, I reclaimed power not through drama, but through clarity. One evening, I posted a single sunset photo on my Instagram, captioning it, "Respect is quiet, disrespect is loud." No drama, no call-outs, just the truth distilled into one quiet moment. The response was overwhelming. Messages of support poured in, strangers sharing similar experiences, people thanking me for demonstrating boundaries in a world obsessed with performance. My followers doubled in days. Brands and colleagues reached out, intrigued by my perspective and work. I realized that walking away had not just been a personal choice. It had resonated with others who felt trapped in similar patterns. Meanwhile, Nathan's world began to unravel in small but telling ways. His public image, carefully curated over years, started to crack. The travel brand suspended his campaign partnership, citing professionalism concerns. Chloe's involvement, once framed as helpful, now looked opportunistic and inappropriate in hindsight. Friends who had once whispered about my supposed insecurity now privately confirmed what I had suspected all along. Nathan had consistently centered himself and his audience over our relationship. It was both empowering and exhausting. I was no longer invisible, but visibility came with responsibility. To myself, to my work, and to the narrative I wanted to own. I felt my sense of self returning, strengthened by quiet triumph rather than spectacle. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was rebuilding. By the end of this escalation, I understood a critical truth. The louder the world tried to shame me, the clearer it became that my choice had been correct. Walking away had not been a retreat. It had been a declaration. Even though I had physically left Maui weeks ago, the weight of the fallout pressed down on me like a storm cloud, refusing to dissipate. The apartment felt suffocating. The walls, silent witnesses to the emotional battle that had been raging in my mind for months. I had hoped leaving Nathan and the chaos behind would bring relief, but instead I was met with a gnawing emptiness. Every notification on my phone made my chest tighten. Even though I had stopped answering Nathan's calls and messages, his attempts to pull me back in, through friends, family, and indirect social media references, had a lingering presence. Each time I scrolled through my feed, I saw hints of the Maui incident, the viral clips, the commentary, the speculation. People didn't know the whole story, yet they judged, criticized, debated. And deep down, I felt a sense of exposure that no one could see but me. I sat at my desk one evening, the glow of the laptop casting harsh light across my tired face. I stared at the sunset photo I had posted days ago. Respect is quiet. Disrespect is loud. The caption had been a deliberate act of reclaiming power, a small assertion that I had boundaries and self-respect. And yet, the photo brought no comfort. I realized that while I had physically walked away, emotionally, I was still tethered to the chaos Nathan had created. Aaron noticed my struggle when he called. "Lisa, I can hear the tension in your voice. You're carrying all of it. His guilt, his drama, even the world's judgment, as if it belongs to you." I sighed, my shoulders heavy with exhaustion. I thought leaving would make me feel free, but it feels like I traded one prison for another, the prison of watching my life, my work, and my choices being dissected publicly, even privately. Sleep came fitfully. When I did rest, my dreams were haunted by replayed moments, Nathan laughing, Chloe leaning in, the group staring. Each image carried a weight far beyond the original incident. I woke up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, my heart racing, a lingering sense of shame gnawing at me, despite knowing logically that I had done nothing wrong. I began doubting myself, wondering if I had overreacted. Maybe if I had stayed, if I had explained more, if I had tried harder to negotiate the boundaries Nathan repeatedly ignored, I could have salvaged the relationship. But every memory of the Maui beach, the public humiliation, the casual disregard of my feelings reminded me that this wasn't a single mistake, it was a pattern, a long, deliberate erosion of my self-worth. The isolation weighed heavily. My friends had supported me initially, but their own lives and commitments meant they could not always be present. I felt cut off, even from my support system, and for the first time in years, I confronted the terrifying reality of complete vulnerability. I had lost the familiar anchor of a relationship, and the world's judgment loomed large in its absence. One night I sat in the dark, the apartment silent except for the occasional siren outside, and allowed myself to cry. Ugly, unrestrained crying. The kind that leaves your face streaked, your hands shaking, your chest raw. I let every moment of fear, grief, frustration, and self-doubt pour out. I had been strong for so long, and now, for the first time, I realized that strength without rest was not endurance, it was denial. I revisited my past journals, reading through months of careful documentation, photographs, and reflections. Each entry reminded me that I had been steadily shrinking to fit Nathan's expectations, hiding my voice, my talents, my desires. And yet, within those pages, there were also glimmers of who I truly was. A photographer who saw the world quietly, a person who valued substance over performance, someone capable of setting boundaries even when it hurt. Even in this darkness, a seed of clarity began to grow. I realized that my despair wasn't a sign of weakness. It was proof that I had cared deeply, that I had invested love and energy into a relationship that ultimately did not reciprocate it. The raw ache I felt was the necessary precursor to reclaiming myself fully. It was the tipping point where sorrow transformed into insight, where despair hinted at the possibility of empowerment. By the end of that week, I was exhausted, emotionally drained, but more honest with myself than I had been in years. I recognized the patterns, the manipulations, the disregard. I saw the consequences not just of Nathan's actions, but of my own complacency in allowing them to continue. And I realized that this dark moment, this abyss, was the final step before the turning point, the place where I would decide, finally, that my worth was independent of Nathan, Chloe, or any audience. For the first time in months, I made a quiet decision. I would not shrink anymore. I would not justify, explain, or perform for anyone. I would honor my boundaries, my feelings, and my value. The darkness was heavy, but within it, I could feel the first flicker of light, the resolve to rise, to act, and to reclaim the life that was always mine to live. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when the turning point arrived, not with a dramatic confrontation, not with another viral clip, but with a single, unassuming email. My inbox pinged, and at first I ignored it, expecting yet another passive-aggressive message from Nathan, or a friend relaying gossip. But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. The email was from one of the other influencers on the Maui trip, someone I barely knew but who had observed everything from a distance. She wrote with surprising honesty, "Lisa, I just want you to know that what happened on Maui wasn't your fault. Nathan has been treating you unfairly for months. Chloe's involvement was inappropriate, and the way the group reacted enabled his behavior. I'm sorry you had to go through this." Attached were screenshots from the group chat during the trip, private messages between Nathan and Chloe, and even a few candid shots showing their body language at the beach. The evidence was undeniable. Chloe had been flirting. Nathan had laughed and encouraged it, and the group had silently approved it. Every nagging doubt I had ever felt, every uncomfortable moment I had tried to rationalize away, was now crystal clear. I wasn't imagining it. I hadn't overreacted. For the first time in weeks, a sense of relief washed over me. My chest loosened, my heart rate slowed, and I finally allowed myself to breathe. The reality of the situation, once clouded by public perception and Nathan's manipulation, now stood in stark clarity. I realized that my instinct to walk away had been correct from the start. That evening, I called Aaron to process it. "It's all here," I said, voice trembling. "I wasn't wrong. I wasn't imagining it. I was right to leave." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "Lisa, you've always been right about yourself. You just needed the evidence to see it clearly. Now you can move forward without doubt." That night, I sat at my desk, opening my photography journal and reviewing the last few months. I realized something profound. For the first time, I was no longer acting in reaction to Nathan or Chloe. I was seeing everything from a place of clarity, free from manipulation, free from fear, free from guilt. My boundaries were no longer abstract. They were solid, non-negotiable, and supported by undeniable truth. The next day, I called a close friend, Daniel, a mentor in my photography work. He had always emphasized the importance of perspective. "Daniel, I have everything now, the evidence, the clarity, but I feel still small. I feel like I've been shrinking for years." He chuckled softly. "Lisa, you haven't been shrinking. You've been surviving. Surviving under someone else's expectations is hard, but surviving is not the same as disappearing. And now, you can grow. You can take up space. You don't need permission. You just need to exist fully in your own life." His words resonated. I realized that the turning point wasn't about punishing Nathan or Chloe. It wasn't about social media or public validation. It was about reclaiming myself, seeing the truth, and acting with integrity. The evidence didn't just prove Nathan's wrongs. It proved my strength, my judgment, and my capacity to honor my own value. I began taking small, deliberate actions. I organized the screenshots and messages not to confront Nathan, but to have a record for myself, a tangible reminder that my intuition, my feelings, and my decisions had always been valid. I revisited my Instagram, my portfolio, and my professional contacts, realizing that the energy I had spent shrinking could now be poured into my work, my art, and my own life. That evening, I went for a long walk along the San Diego coastline. The sun was low, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Each step along the sand felt like a release, a physical acknowledgement of the emotional weight I had carried for months. With every inhale, I reminded myself, I am not responsible for their actions. I am responsible for my life, my boundaries, and my happiness. And in that moment, I felt a shift, quiet, profound, unstoppable. The turning point wasn't a single event. It was a series of realizations, culminating in one undeniable truth. I had survived, I had acted with integrity, and I had finally reclaimed the power Nathan and Chloe had tried to undermine. For the first time in months, I smiled, not a performance, not a curated moment for an audience, but a real, deep, unguarded smile. I was no longer lost in someone else's world. I was standing firmly in my own. By the time the fallout fully settled, the world Nathan had built around himself and Chloe had begun to crumble, and I watched it from a distance, calm, collected, and resolute. It was almost surreal how quickly the ripple of consequences spread once the truth became undeniable. The viral clips from Maui had already circulated widely, but now, with evidence in the hands of people who mattered, Nathan's reputation among his friends, collaborators, and even his family began to erode. Brands pulled partnerships, citing breaches of professionalism and public trust. Influencers he had worked with quietly distanced themselves, leaving gaps in his network that had previously seemed unshakable. Chloe, too, faced the backlash. Private messages leaked among the influencer community revealed her flirtations and the way she encouraged Nathan's disregard for me. Suddenly, she wasn't just fun and charming. She was the person who had actively participated in undermining a partner publicly. I did not have to make a single public statement. I did not engage in petty arguments or post-traumatic rebuttals. The truth spoke for itself. Friends and colleagues who had previously asked questions discreetly now approached Nathan cautiously. Some confronted him directly. One of the travel brand's coordinators, privy to the sponsorship agreements, explained in no uncertain terms that Nathan had violated clauses, putting contracts at risk. He had to refund part of the expenses, apologize publicly, and even endure private HR meetings with brand management. The professional consequences were swift and undeniable. Even Nathan's family, who had once subtly pressured me to be accommodating, began questioning his behavior. A few close relatives privately admitted that his charm and confidence had blinded them to the pattern of disrespect. Chloe's attempts to mitigate the damage by blaming Nathan fell flat. Anyone who had seen the Maui interactions firsthand knew she had been just as involved. Meanwhile, I focused on myself. My photography career, once a quiet passion, suddenly gained momentum. With the extra energy I had reclaimed, I revisited projects I had shelved, connected with mentors, and finally pursued gallery exhibitions I had hesitated to attempt. My Instagram, now free from the toxic entanglement with Nathan and Chloe, became a platform to showcase my work authentically. No staged poses, no curated lifestyle. It was purely me, quietly confident, entirely present. I began leading small workshops for people recovering from difficult relationships or creative blocks. Teaching others to see and capture the world through photography became a form of healing for both myself and my students. The workshops gained traction, and soon, people were coming from outside the city to learn, to share their stories, and to create art as therapy. The sense of purpose I had been missing for months now pulsed vividly through my days. Nathan reached out once, an email, brief, apologetic in tone, claiming he had realized his mistakes and wanted to reconnect. I read it once, then archived it without responding. Chloe sent a message through a mutual friend, explaining that she didn't understand the depth of her actions and asking if we could talk it out. I considered the words for a moment, then deleted the message. I had no need for closure from them anymore. The clarity and peace I sought existed within myself, not in their acknowledgement. Social media, surprisingly, reflected this shift. The beach clip, once a source of viral humiliation, was now cited in articles, forums, and discussions about boundaries, respect, and emotional intelligence. People referenced my calm, deliberate departure as an example of strength, not of cruelty, but of self-respect. Strangers sent messages thanking me for showing that walking away from toxic dynamics could be powerful and necessary. I was no longer shrinking. I was being seen as my authentic self. The greatest satisfaction, however, was private. In quiet moments, walking along the coast, editing photos, or sitting with Aaron and other close friends, I felt a deep, unshakable sense of self-worth. Nathan and Chloe's collapse was not my triumph. It was simply the natural consequence of their choices. I did not take pleasure in their struggle. I simply observed that integrity carries its own power, and those who disregard it eventually face the results. By the end of the fallout, the Maui chapter was no longer a source of pain, but a source of perspective. I understood now that relationships, whether personal or professional, require respect, boundaries, and mutual care. When those are absent, no amount of charm, history, or social media fame can substitute for integrity. I had survived the storm, and in doing so, had reclaimed the narrative of my own life. The final lesson of the fallout became clear. Leaving wasn't an act of weakness. It was an assertion of value. Walking away, staying true to myself, and refusing to perform for someone else's validation had restored not just my career, but my sense of self. I had regained my voice, my agency, and my joy. And for the first time in months, I could breathe deeply, without fear, without shame, and without compromise. Months passed, and the chaos of Maui became a distant memory, softened by time but strengthened in its lessons. I no longer checked notifications obsessively or second-guessed every interaction. Instead, I walked through my days with quiet assurance, anchored in the understanding that my worth was not tied to anyone else's validation. My photography flourished. Exhibitions I had only dreamed of became reality. The Stillwater series, capturing reflective landscapes, quiet horizons, and untouched corners of nature, resonated deeply with people. It wasn't just about images, it was about presence, patience, and honesty. I taught workshops, mentored aspiring photographers, and created a space where others could rediscover themselves through art. Each student, each conversation, reinforced that the power of self-respect ripples outward. Love entered my life again, not as a storm, not as performance, but gently, without conditions. I met Aaron, a park ranger, during a shoot at Torrey Pines. He was grounded, steady, and present in a way I had never experienced. We hiked, cooked, and watched sunsets without capturing them for an audience. Our connection was quiet but profound, built on mutual respect and shared presence. For the first time, love felt like a partnership, not a production. I reflected often on the Maui trip, on Nathan and Chloe, on the heartbreak and humiliation. I forgave, not for their sake, but for mine. Forgiveness was not reconciliation. It was the freedom to stop carrying anger, to stop shrinking, to stop bending myself to fit someone else's world. Their downfall was not my victory. It was the natural consequence of their choices. My real triumph was in reclaiming myself. Sometimes I think about what I would say to my past self, the one sitting alone in the hotel room at 4 a.m., heart pounding, suitcase in hand. I would tell her, "You are enough. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to breathe. You are allowed to choose yourself." And now I live that truth every day. I no longer perform for approval. I no longer sacrifice myself for someone else's image or ego. Respect is no longer something I ask for. It is something I embody and demand for myself. I am home, not in a place, but in the version of me I finally accept and cherish. The lessons of betrayal, heartbreak, and courage remain etched in me, but they are no longer wounds. They are markers of growth. I know now that strength often lies in leaving, in walking away before the storm destroys you, and in finding the peace that only comes when you stop shrinking and start living for yourself. I am Lisa. I survived. I reclaimed my life. And for the first time, I feel fully, unapologetically, and undeniably at home in myself.